We're going to explain the request had insufficient authentication scopes error you might encounter when using Google APIs. This frustrating error means your application doesn't have the necessary permissions to access the Google service you're trying to use. Let's troubleshoot this together. 1. Verify the API is enabled. First, head to the Google Cloud Console. Make sure the specific Google API you're using, like the YouTube Data API or Google Calendar API, is actually enabled for your project. You can find this under APIs and Services library. If it's not enabled, simply click the Enable button. 2. Check your Auth 2.0 consent screen. This is crucial. Your application needs a consent screen properly configured to request the required permissions. Navigate to your project's OAuth consent screen in the Google Cloud Console, APIs and Services, Credentials. Ensure it's correctly set up with appropriate details, including your application's name and a privacy policy URL if needed. This screen is where you define what data your app wants access to, so make sure those permissions accurately reflect what your API calls need. 3. Examine your requested scopes. This is often the root cause. Your application requests access using scopes. These are specific permissions. If your code requests insufficient scopes, you'll see this error. The requested scopes must align perfectly with what your API call needs. For example, to read YouTube videos, you need a different scope than to upload videos. Check the API's documentation carefully to identify the correct scopes. You'll typically need to add those scopes when you're setting up your OAuth credentials and when you're making the authorization request in your code. Incorrectly spelled or incomplete scopes will result in this issue. 4. Review your authentication flow. The process by which your application obtains an access token is crucial. Double-check your authentication flow. Are you using the correct Google authentication libraries? Are you properly handling the redirect URLs and authorization codes? Errors in this process can prevent your application from receiving the necessary scopes, even if your consent screen is configured correctly. Common issues include mismatched redirect URLs and incorrectly storing or using the access token. 5. Check your code. Carefully review the code where you are making the API request. Make absolutely sure you're including the correct access token in the request header. A missing or improperly formatted access token is a frequent reason for authentication failure. The way you add the access token varies depending on the API and programming language. Refer to the API documentation for instructions. Also ensure that your code handles potential errors appropriately. 6. Test thoroughly. After making any changes, thoroughly test your application to confirm it's now working correctly. Use tools provided by Google to help you debug authorization and API calls. Remember to clear your browser's cache and cookies and even restart your system if necessary to ensure you're not working with outdated tokens or data. By carefully checking each of these steps, you'll significantly increase your chances of resolving the request had insufficient authentication scopes error.